Content warning. Things can get pretty rough in prison. We're going to be talking about some subjects that some people might find disturbing. Hi, I'm Amelia Saw, and this is On Guard, a podcast about what really goes on inside prison. And it comes from the best source in town, the prison officers. Unlike police, who go looking for the bad guys, each day a prison officer turns up at work, they're guaranteed to find them. Imagine doing a job where every shift was spent rubbing shoulders with Australia's worst criminals. These are the heroes who keep the country's rapists, serial killers and child molesters exactly where the rest of us want them, locked away in prison. But you don't walk away from a job like that unscathed. These guys have got stories. Most of them are shocking, some of them are tragic, and others are just bloody funny. The one thing I can guarantee is that you've never come across anything like it. Beatrix Trixie Bennett-Hiller is no ordinary grandma. She's got 17 years of service as a corrections officer under her belt, and she's no delicate flower. During the 90s and noughties, she worked at Goulburn Maximum Security Prison, Mullewa Correctional Centre, a maximum security prison for women, and finished her career at John Moroney Correctional Centre. Trixie, thank you for joining me. How are you?
Fair.
Fair? Just fair. And tell me, we're recording with you at home at the moment, and you live on a farm, or?
I've got 100 acres.
Wow.
The back of Bruff.
And there's a few animals there in the background. Who else is joining us? Some chooks?
Oh, yes, there's a mother hen laying eggs and showing how grateful she is. She's laying eggs and cackling and carrying on.
Yes.
We've got all sorts of wildlife here, keep us occupied.
A bit different to the wildlife you used to manage in the prisons?
Oh, yeah, they do as they're told.
What, the people in the inmates or the animals?
Well, both, really, yes.
Yeah. Hey, so tell me, you began your career in 1989. And I'm guessing at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking being a corrections officer in 1989 was pretty much a male-dominated game. Is that right?
Very much so. Very much so. You had to prove yourself, and that rarely happened.
So you mean
as a woman,
the blokes didn't take you seriously?
No, the officers didn't take you seriously.
Right.
Inmates were fine.
Yeah. And what about you? How did you feel kind of being, for example, a female officer working in one of those, in Goulburn maximum security with all these hardened killers and sex offenders? What was that like?
You never judged what they were. You weren't there to judge them. You were just there to contain them, as to be an officer to keep them contained. So you didn't treat them any different than really anyone else. They just had to do a regimented, structured day, and they were all right. And once they got to know that you were fair and you treated them with, respect, that was fine. I never had much trouble at all. You
didn't feel vulnerable because you were a woman and these were kind of, male, presumably stronger physically than you? That didn't...
No, I got a pretty sharp tongue.
And that was your weapon, was it?
It was. And, I can do it with a smile on my face and they know I was serious, I didn't have any trouble. They just couldn't pull the wool over my eyes.
Right, and you had 3 little kids at the time, didn't you? So you go from mum duties, presumably packing school lunches and reading bedtime stories to being, this tough kind of hard-ass warden. Is that fair?
Yeah. I had 2 that had already left home by that.
Right.
I only had the one left. And he's just as hard-assed as I am. Still is.
So you started at Goulburn Maximum Security, which is a prison with a pretty kind of formidable reputation, isn't it? Even now, it's famous for housing some of Australia's worst inmates. And when you started on that first day, had you ever walked into a prison before, or was it your first time?
On training, they took us through Parramatta.
Mm-hmm.
That particular day was pretty daunting. But I believe that it was a setup. We were taken to this wing, and the wing officer, a female, had told us that we had to go to the cells and rip down all of the posters off the walls. The inmates were not supposed to have posters on the walls, and the inmates were not warned that this was going to happen. But she decided to do it when there was brand new trainees there. Well, it nearly ended up in a riot.
Oh, really?
And they had to lock us in the back of the office until the inmates had settled down and other officers from other areas come and calm them down. So that was like, hello, this is a setup, but it was for real. The inmates were upset.
And when they were rioting, they were what, yelling, kind of what kind of things were they doing?
Just yelling out abuse and rattling the gates and just making a lot of noise and bashing on the office windows, and that was, a lot of abusive language happening, which is pretty normal.
So they threw you in the deep end straight away.
Yeah, but really, I just said it's a setup. The office ended up getting into trouble, but you shouldn't put new people in a situation like that.
No. So some of the people at Goulburn Maximum Security, there was the Anita Cobby murderers, weren't there? There was Janine Balding's killer, Shorty Jameson, was there.
Yes.
These men are kind of, I think most people would know, in Australia at least, would know who they are, and they're famous, really, for want of a better word, but not for anything good. They're famous for the atrocity of their crimes, for the terrible things that they put these young women through as they were kind of killing them. So for you, what was that like? You'd obviously heard about these men before you met them.
Police tonight are investigating the killing of a young woman near Prospect.
The 26-year-old nurse was snatched as she walked home from Blacktown train station on February 2nd, 1986. She was brutally raped, her throat was cut, and she was left to die in a cattle paddock. After a 22-day manhunt, a lengthy police investigation and a murder trial, 5 men were convicted.
Let the public fix him! Kill the bastard! Kill him!
A Supreme Court judge likened the men to wild animals before he jailed them for life, amid calls to bring back the death penalty.
These animals represent pure evil.
What was it like, for example, to meet some of the Cobby killers?
I found it quite difficult to deal with my hatred, if you like, for them, because I lived in that area. I had previously lived in that area, not at the time.
Where Anita Cobby was taken?
Yes.
And that's Blacktown in Sydney, isn't it?
That's right. I lived in that area. I lived in a place called Dean Park, and I knew the area, the Doon side, where they came from. So the trial went on 87. They've been in jail since 87. There's only 2 of them left in Goulburn now. I think one of the brothers died. Oh, so sad. And the other one, Gary, he was taken to Long Bay Hospital for treatment, and he got a little bit of his own treatment. He got bashed up.
Badly?
Yes, he's in a wheelchair now.
Oh, as a result of the assault?
Yeah.
How does that happen? I mean, I'm assuming these prisoners are in protection.
Yeah. It just takes a little bit of lack of concentration on the officer's part, and left alone. I'm not sure. I think it was, the Long Bay Hospital is a hospital within the confines of Long Bay Jail. Although it's not behind the walls, it's out of the walls, and like they still have non-protection inmates in there. and they must have known who he was, and
So
decided to do it.
Explain a bit to me and to anyone out there who isn't quite sure how prison justice works. The Cobby killers, they would have been targets, wouldn't they, to the rest of the prison population?
Yes.
And why? How does that work? Because of the nature of their crime?
Yes, and it was just so high publicity. It was just in the media so often, and just it's just something that people just never forget. And John Travers, the main perp, he's the worst. He's got such a bad attitude, and he has threatened that he'd do it again if he was released.
Wow, is that something you overheard him say?
It was heard. No, I didn't hear it, but it was heard, and we hear things, and he said he'd do it again. So he's in the right place, and he'll probably never leave protection.
Travers was he was considered to be the ringleader, wasn't he? He had this history of very violent sexual behaviour, and terrible kind of a history even of bestiality, and
with sheep.
So you would
the mind ball.
I mean, that was quite well publicised. You would have known all of this, and then all of a sudden you were coming face to face with this guy in the prison.
Yes, yeah. I couldn't, because of the nature of the crime, and I had followed it from the inception of their arrest, and I'd heard of what happened on the night of their arrest, how they tried to escape out the back fence, and the police helicopter was going overhead, and the police that were chasing him in the yard were trying to wave the helicopter away because they wanted to go and give him a big cuddle.
With Travers in prison, was he polite? Was he respectful? I mean, I'm doubting he was, but what was he like as an inmate?
In his own way. He didn't flare up. He was a bit, probably about 1993, there was an incident where he grabbed a female officer, and luckily there's other officers, and he was going to drag her into the cell. This lady was never left alone because she was just too pretty, just too pretty to be in a jail situation. I don't think she lasted too long after that. There was a thing called let go. Let them go, but maybe could have been 8 o'clock in the morning when they're let out of their cells. I can't exactly remember the time, but it was on a let go, and she's opened the cell and he's grabbed her arm to pull her in. He must have heard a voice or knew she was there, but there's always officers in the next cell, so she'll open one and an officer will open the next one. So they're always close by, and she was always looked after. I can't remember. I should have imagined you would have. I should have imagined you would have.
When you guys were working and the Cobby killers were there, I'd imagine there'd be quite a lot of discussion about them just because of who they are, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There was no hiding who they were. I mean, you just look. You only had to look at him, and he's got under one of his eyes. I don't know which one it was. Teardrops, and I think that's supposed to be a sign of death or something. So it's significant having a teardrop tattoo underneath the eye, or under the corner of your eye. I think it was. I'm picturing him. It's under the corner of his eye, so straight away everybody knows. Oh, the bloke with the tattoo under his eye. So wherever he goes, he's known.
Did they get special treatment? Were there any special kind of rules around dealing with them, or?
Yeah, so they had to be, when they were let out anywhere, like for instance, I used to do the phone calls. All the other yards had to be locked down before he was allowed out to come and do his phone call.
Because he would get attacked?
Yes. Same as any other protection inmate. Other yards had to be shut down, locked down, and no more movement on the circle until they'd completed their phone call and gone back in, escorted all the time.
The circle Trixie is referring to is the infamous circle at Goulburn Prison. It's a flat semicircle area of concrete in the middle of the prison, flanked by buildings, caged prison yards, and watchtowers on either side. Guards with guns patrol the area, which has seen its fair share of violence, brawls and bloodshed over the years. Serial killer Ivan Milat, the Cobby Killers, the gang-raping Scaff brothers and the notorious Brothers for Life crime boss, Bassam Hamzy, have all left their footprints on the circle.
It's still in force today, still works today.
And that's because you have to keep, one inmate has it out for another. There are different gangs. Is that what it is? It's a management technique to stop them all from kind of tearing each other apart.
Yes, a classification because apparently Goulburn is famous for the motorcycle gang, the Finks. So you'd have to keep them in control, away from different classifications. They even had some remands in there. One remand wing. And then you had your high security and E classification, which is the escapees, and different classifications in different yards.
And you used to work is the term a phones officer? You used to work to help facilitate some of their phone calls, didn't you?
Yeah, but isn't it amazing? Every time I tried to put a phone call through for him, there was never anyone home. Damn about that.
Another murderer Trixie got to know was Stephen Shorty Jameson. Jameson was one of 5 homeless youths who were charged for the thrill kill of Janine Balding in 1988. Janine was just a 21-year-old bank teller when she was abducted from the car park of Sutherland Railway Station in South Sydney. She was raped at knife point, gagged, hog-tied and drowned in a dam by 3 of the youths. The court heard that on the day Janine was murdered, Jameson had met his co-offenders Bronson Blessington and Matthew Elliott at a Sydney homeless shelter. Then one of them proposed, "Why don't we get a Sheila and rape her?" The line became a famous catch cry for the crime and has gone down in history for its horror. It is only equal to Anita Cobby's murder in terms of its horrific nature, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Both quite similar. But
and Shorty Jameson was one of those men who did those terrible things to her, and here he was standing, probably less than a metre from you.
Yes. I couldn't stand above him. I couldn't deal with him at the time when I was the wing officer, and he'd come to me and ask me, like, maybe for a special phone call. "Oh, miss, can I have a phone call? I need to ring so and so." No. Go away. I just couldn't say yes to him. Go away. He's a product of a brother-sister relationship. And that's why if you see photos of him, he looks like an ape. He's got long hair. He's so ugly, you'd slap the mother, not the child.
So tell me, you also had a bit of a run-in with him, didn't you? He didn't like you.
Oh, no, he didn't like me. No, I didn't realise, I didn't know at the time that he was ready to have a go at me, because every time he asked for something, I'd say no. And I had these other inmates that had my back, that sort of looked after me. And I was letting some inmate in a yard or out of a yard, and the one that was protecting me come between the two of us, because Shorty was coming behind me. He was going to grab me because this other inmate told me. He said, "He's after you. Bring it on." And this other, I can't even remember their names, put his arm between Shorty and me and told Shorty to, go for a short walk, and he was going to come after me because I just couldn't deal with him. Just because of his crime and what they were, it just repulsed me, I become very unprofessional at that time.
So he reached out to grab you. What do you think his intentions were?
Probably to hit me, probably punch me. He couldn't have done anything else because it was right in, like, on the circle where other officers were. But he still could have punched me.
So, in maximum security with these killers like the Cobby killers, Janine Balding's killer, Shorty Jameson, how do you kind of, I suppose, keep them in line? I mean, for example, when you give them dinner, are they allowed metal cutlery? Talk us through kind of some of the provisions that are there to stop these guys kind of wreaking havoc.
Yeah, with that, there was a on-site kitchen where there were some privileged inmates could go in the kitchen and prepare the meals. That was back in my day. Nowadays, it's all pre-packed in different jails, like in foil containers. But back then, it was cooked in kitchens in Goulburn, and they'd come in on great big trolleys, and each wing would have their own trolley full, and they'd have their own cutlery and their own plates, metal plates. Just normal. But if there's any playing up with them, they'd lose them. If they know that if they abused anything, then the rest of the wings would suffer by being taken away from them.
So they were given access to things that they could potentially use as a weapon.
Oh, yes, yeah. Or they'd make them themselves out of toothbrushes or anything like that. They'd file down take the bristle end off the toothbrush and file it down sharp and make a shiv. They're pretty productive. If they want a weapon, they can find one and make one.
Did you see any?
And hide them.
Did you see any pretty shocking assaults in there?
I was. Yes, I saw one. I saw Andrew. I don't know if you know. Yeah, Andrew Garforth.
He's Ebony Simpson's killer.
Yes, yes.
In 1992, 9-year-old Ebony Simpson was abducted, raped and killed as she walked home from school. Ebony was walking down the road in Bargo, New South Wales, when she passed a parked yellow car belonging to Andrew Garforth. When Ebony walked past, Garforth grabbed her and put her in the boot. Here's Detective Rod Grant recounting what Garforth said happened next.
He drove Ebony to a bush track down not far away. He went to the back of his car, got some speaker wire, and he tied her hands behind her back and her feet behind her as well, and then tied her feet to her hands. And he just picked her up and threw her in the dam.
When news spread Ebony was missing, locals joined with police to find the little girl, scouring surrounding bushland in the hope she may be found alive. Shockingly, Andrew Garforth joined the search and can be seen in photographs standing at the back of the search party. When the truth finally came out, the community was outraged and gathered at the court for Garforth's trial, screaming abuse.
Keep looking over your shoulder, buddy. We'll tie his arms and legs and see how he goes. Come on, get him here now.
And things didn't get much better for Garforth once he got to prison. Here's Trixie.
The governor at the time decided in his wisdom, which wasn't very wise, to move inmates from an area down the back of the jail. It was outside, I think it was called the multi-purpose unit at that stage. He decided that he was going to bring them all back in. So he brought them all back in and threw them into my wing. And so we had this bulk inmates, like 100 of them. It was 100 in 1 yard. And I was the wing officer at the front, and I had this female officer come running in. She said, Garforth's being bashed. And I was way out the other end of the wing, and she was already down that one. I said, all right, I'll meet you around there. So I went through, and I had to inform somebody, and then I followed her through, and she stood on the outside of the yard. She didn't want to come in. because there was just too many inmates in there, and she was a bit afraid. And I didn't. I said, well, you go through there. And she didn't want to come through. There was another inmate at the other gate that was also, because he was a pedophile, and he was also going to get bashed.
That pedophile was Robert Dolly Dunn. Dunn was jailed for 2 decades for a series of sexual assaults on young boys. A former Catholic schoolteacher, he often found his victims through his job. Preying on boys as young as 7, he often filmed his sexual encounters so he could peruse them later for pleasure.
And he was sitting on the seat and he was petrified, shaking his boots. And I said to him, you grab him and get him out the gate. And I said to him, I'll get this one. And Garforth's laying on the ground. The other inmates there, they're all standing to the side. They've already done what they want to do. They're not going to touch me. And I know them well because
Garforth was lying on the ground. He'd been pretty badly beaten up.
Yeah. Yes. What they did was the one that always had my back was there, and I just looked at him. Oh, you bad boys! and they had picked him up and just rammed him into a brick wall, and he had eggs on his head. So obviously they'd done it a couple of times before we got there. So I had to end up getting him out gate where I'd come from, and I can't remember the female that was there. She got done and got him out the other end, and I had to take him upstairs and talk to them. And he said, "Oh, thank you, miss. Thank you for saving my life." So well, I'm just doing my job, not because of what he is, just doing my job.
Now,
I wasn't doing it to be kind.
Must be pretty weird when, for example, Andrew Garforth, this guy, he murdered a little girl, little Ebony Simpson, and yet then you as a prison officer, you're put in a position where you actually have to intervene to help him, to save his life. Yep. That must be a weird contradiction to deal with, I suppose, mentally for you.
Yeah, you just do. You know what you're supposed to do. You know what your job is. You don't step over the line, no matter what, and no matter what the offence is. You don't step over. Like I had to deal with a lot of pedophiles. You just had to put up a barrier. You weren't in there to judge them. They've already been judged.
Yeah,
you just had to do what you had to do.
In my previous conversations with Trixie, I'd asked her if she remembered any female inmates from her time working at Mullewa Correctional Centre. She told me about an inmate called Roxanne Holmes. Roxanne, or Roxy as she's known by friends, was a wild child who had committed a series of armed robberies across Australia. Suffering with a then undiagnosed mental health condition called dissociative identity disorder, Roxanne often self-harmed. In one particularly dramatic incident, she took her caseworker hostage. Roxanne was angry because she had been refused parole, so for 45 minutes she held a steak knife at her caseworker's throat while the governor negotiated with her. She eventually put the knife down, but for those involved, they have never forgotten it. I managed to find Roxy, who is now long out of prison and lives a law-abiding life on Sydney's northern beaches. She's agreed to join the interview with Trixie so the pair can be reunited after more than 15 years. Now, Trixie, I can see Roxy's waiting to join our call, Roxanne Holmes. So tell me, goodness, it must be at least, what do you think, at least 10, 15 years since you've seen Roxy?
Oh my gosh, that was about 2000 early 2000, 2001.
And
around the same. Yeah.
What was she? She was doing time for armed robbery, wasn't she?
Yeah. I think that's what. Yeah, she was in for. Yeah.
And you met her at Mullewa Women's Prison. What was she like?
A handful.
Yes.
A handful. Attention seeker.
Attention seeker in what way?
Oh, she'd carve up her arms. You know, she had a really good, funny personality. She was a funny girl. I believe at the time she had a daughter.
Yeah.
So I suppose the daughter probably gave her the incentive to change and settle down.
Yeah.
She wasn't bad. She was not hard to handle. She could be funny. She'd be very funny, very amusing. Like I say, she just had a lot to deal with, and I suppose trying to be funny and attention seeking, climbing up on roofs in the stinking hot sun. You know, that'd be one way to attract attention.
Let's admit Roxanne Holmes. Here she is. Hello,
Roxy.
Roxy.
Hello, Trixie. How are you?
Hello, Roxanne. You in the car?
Yes, I am in the car.
You're not driving, I hope.
No, I'm not driving.
How long's it been since you two have seen each other?
Oh my gosh, early 2000s, 2001, 2002.
Yeah, I think it was around 2001, something like that.
Yeah.
So, Rox, tell us.
I was there for the Olympics.
It's been a long time. Pre-COVID days.
Yeah, a long time pre-COVID. And so, Rox, tell us, at that time you were a young inmate. You would correct me if I'm wrong. You were doing time for armed robbery. Is that right?
I'm actually not sure. I was very naughty back in those days, but I was doing some time. But I've since leaving Her Majesty's, I have been in therapy, and I discovered that I have dissociative identity disorder from years of trauma, and so it's quite hard at times to recollect times, dates, etc. But I was in there. I think it was for robbery, something like that.
And you remember
I read your
Trixie?
book.
I do. Like seeing Trixie's face has just brought it all back. Like I can remember Trixie.
Hey, Roxanne.
Yes.
Do you remember being in Dawndeloa Centre and climbing up onto one of the units on top of the roof?
I think I did that a few times, actually. I recall being handcuffed to one of the prison officers at Long Bay, and I men's jail, because they sent me to the men's jail because I think they just couldn't control my behaviour. And yeah, I climbed up this huge building up the stairs, and I jumped off the edge, and I was dangling by a handcuff. I recall that. And I recall I used to climb on the buildings, actually on the stairs outside. I think it was like 20 stories up, and it was a really old building. You know, it's a really hard place to be in prison.
I remember the day that you're up on one of the units at the Dawndeloa Centre, and the regional commander happened to be there. And he said, if you don't get down, we're going to get the fire hose on you.
Oh, Lord have mercy. I don't blame him. Oh,
you came down because it was so hot. It was stinking middle of summer. And you did come down, but you could always make me laugh.
Yeah, I did a lot of crazy things in there. Things when I look back on all of the things that happened in there, you know, like I actually took, I don't know if you recall, but I actually had been in a safe cell for 9 months in Mullawa, and I wanted to die. I mean, I was separated from my daughter, dissociating all the time and voices, and I ended up taking a lawyer who was my lawyer. Sadly, I did this, and with great regret and remorse now, but I took a hostage in there. I don't know if you remember that.
It's vaguely familiar.
Yeah,
yes,
my female lawyer. And I'll never know why I did that, but I was just really in a dark place.
You were. You're not in a good space. Yeah.
No, I wasn't. And after 5 years of therapy, I'm so much better. I have insight into who I am. And back then, being in prison, I mean, you're just a prisoner. I was a prisoner within my own mind. So I couldn't regulate myself in there, and I had no self-control or control over my mental health. And, you know, being prison officers, you guys see the best and the worst of people. And I was probably one of the worst prisoners in there, behavioural-wise. But looking back,
you were looking for attention. You were looking for something. You were looking for a lot of attention, probably the wrong way, but
Yeah,
you were
I
looking
think-
for something, you know?
I think there's attention seeking and there's attention needing. And I think because I couldn't manage, because I couldn't manage my head and my emotions, I think that I acted out what I couldn't say. I didn't have really a voice. So everything that I went through, obviously went through in terms of behaviour. You saw the behaviour, but not really what was going on. And I couldn't see it myself. So I did, look, I must have done. Hearing all the stories from things that happened to me in there that I did, like I'm actually really ashamed of myself, the things that I did. But
that was a different person. How are your arms? That was a different person. How are your arms?
My arms are good. Like I haven't self-harmed for a very long time.
I was with you when we had to take you to Westmead one day.
Really?
And
What
saw
did I
your
do?
arms slashed your arms.
Westmead
And you were
Hospital.
told if you kept on doing it, you were going to lose your arm.
Really? I don't know.
Yeah. The doctor said if you keep on doing that, you're going to lose your arm.
The doctor said? I didn't know that. Like I can't recall a lot of that time in there.
No.
It was, you know, that self-harming, I think a lot of prisoners and people who have trauma, and a lot of women that go to jail have already experienced trauma in their everyday lives. And the system just allows, I mean, obviously because of the conditions in there, there isn't a whole lot of therapy that goes on in the system. So a lot of self-harming, it's really prevalent in jails, especially women.
Yeah.
You know, rereading my history and my files and things, and I can't believe the things that I did in there. It just doesn't seem like it was me. But I'm thankful that I'm alive. You know, I recall a couple of suicides in there in Mullawa, and I was really. There was a young girl that I recall, an Indigenous girl who took her life, and that was pretty sad. Yeah, I met some really interesting women in there. I was actually in there when, what's her name? There was a lady that was charged with murder, her husband.
Oh, yeah, Roseanne Cat.
Yeah, Roseanne Cat, and she was found, innocent, wasn't she, years later?
Correct, yes.
Roseanne Cat. And she always, she actually, I recall her at times saying she was innocent, and nobody believed her, which was a bit sad.
She showed me. She showed me the proof she had. Yeah.
Really? Wow. And then there was some of the prison officers in there were quite, that I remember. There was Roxy. Do you remember Roxy?
Yeah, Big Roxy. Yeah, Big Ross. Yeah.
And then his son. There are a couple of ones that I do recall that were quite mean to me. It was a hard place. I mean, I think the prison officers generally, it's like life. You get there's good ones, and then there's not so good ones.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's true.
But the one thing, it's definitely not like the TV, like Orange is the New Black. It's nothing like it.
It's not?
Sorry, that's my friend.
No.
There's
not even like Wentworth. Nothing like
Wentworth. It is nothing like Wentworth. It's just
no. Some of the scenarios. Oh my gosh! You could throw something at the television. That's not how it works.
No, that is not how it runs. And the other one was Rebecca Butterfield. I was there.
Oh, Rebecca, mad Rebecca. Oh.
She set herself on fire, and that was really traumatizing. I was actually next door to her when that happened, in the cell next door.
She's Rebecca Butterfield now is she's often got the moniker of Australia's most dangerous female prisoner, isn't she? Most dangerous female inmate.
She is, and I actually stayed in touch with her, and I went to visit her years down the track. But she set herself on fire, and then she started doing really violent things in there. Cracking her skull open. And I mean, the prison officers said that they were quite scared of her because she was really unpredictable, and she'd do things that were really, set cells on fire, smash her head open, break her skull open, throw urine at the officers, and those sorts of things. And even to this day, looking back, I have read that she still does that, and that's quite scary. She should be in a more like a hospital setting, definitely. Yeah. And she's been segregated for years now in there, so that can't be easy for her mental health.
It makes it worse.
It's just like, well, I think prison, it's just like caging an animal. The wilder they are, the longer you cage them, the wilder they get, I think.
Oh, yeah.
There's one thing I do want to ask you about that I remember reading in your book, and it's that you were put into a steel cell, and on the wall there was a phrase written, which obviously has a bit of a double meaning. Now we've got Trixie on the line here, which is that on your wall it was written, "A good screw is hard to find." Can you tell me about that?
Well, a good screw is hard to find. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, if we're talking about women having relations in there, a lot of that goes on. But also, screw, we call the officer screws. That's what were known as. So for me, looking back, I mean, I think they were just doing their jobs, a lot of the officers. But my own experiences of the prison officers, I found was really hard because they didn't understand my mental health and what I was going through. But I have to say, looking back, Trixie was one of the good ones. She was a kind person, and she was kind when I obviously saw her. But and there are a couple of others, I can count them on my hand, that I can look back and say they didn't make my time in there any harder, and they were a bit more compassionate. It was a very hard place to be.
Oh, very, absolutely. Hey, Rox, thank you for dialing in. And Trixie, thank you for sharing all your stories. We might kind of end things there, but thank you for, I'm so glad I got to bring you both together.
Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you, Roxanne. And
happy to see you. We'll have to write a book together, Trixie.
I wish stories. Oh gosh, yes.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, lovely to see you after all these years. And take care. And thank you.
You too.
Thanks, Rox. Thanks, Trixie. Bye. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Now, time for the prison pop quiz. Each episode, I ask a corrections officer to decode the weird, the wacky, and the wonderful of prison slang. They're the words and phrases you'd only know if you'd spent time behind bars. And trust me, some of them are truly disgusting. From your almost 2 decades in corrections, what is a word that you have heard being used around the prison? And tell me an unusual phrase that perhaps I wouldn't know.
You know what they call a pedophile?
No.
A rock spider.
A rock spider. I have heard that one, actually. So what's another word I might need to know?
You might like to know a weapon that they use to harm somebody else.
And what's that?
To defend themselves. It's called a shiv.
So would that be like one of the toothbrushes you were talking about before?
It can be, yes. Can be. Or if they work in the metal section of the jail, the metal works or something, they'll make a shiv out of something sharp, anything they can find.
All right, and do you have a third one?
I know, little terminologies that they'd use if they want to get out of a gate to go somewhere. They call it gate up, boss.
Oh yeah.
And then you'd have to go and approach them and say, what do you want? Where are you going? I want to go so-and-so. And it's only if you know that they are entitled to go, if the coast is clear, if the circle's clear, are they allowed to go? Female officers are sometimes called miss.
Yeah.
And the males are called chief.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, chief or boss. Yeah.
What about did you hear any, I'm sure you've heard your fair share of swear words in your time. Did you hear any unusual insults?
I used to get a few. It used to make me laugh. I'd be up on the circle. This is probably early days when they were testing me out, and they'd say, "Miss, Jenny's looking for you." Jenny who? Jenny Craig. Bit overweight. Oh, okay. I'll give her a call when I get home.
Oh, that's funny.
I'd never bite. They could never upset me.
During her time working in prisons, Trixie Bennett-Hiller stared evil in the face. She was never afraid to stand up to the male prisoners and liked to think she managed with a firm but fair hand. But Trixie didn't kid herself. She knew that every time she turned up for a shift, there was a chance she might not be leaving the same. Next episode, we meet Bob Hastings, the former Commissioner for Corrections Victoria. Bob joined the job with 40 years policing experience. But nothing could have prepared him for just how challenging managing prisons could be, especially when notorious inmate Carl Williams was murdered on his watch.